I'm still setting up my space, but I'm coming on for episode 13 of Conversations with a Passion Pilgrim with my buddy Kieran. Kieran Hedley is from New Zealand and currently in New Zealand. And hey, buddy. And I wanted to bring, he really, I guess I wanted to reconnect with him because there he is.
Oh, yeah.
I'm still like setting up my space, which is awesome.
Yeah, no problem.
Like you're like the most grounded person in my life right now, and I love it. And here I am. I just got home from a run, and I'm like,
nice.
Which is like super grounding for me, but I'm still like sweating and like whatever. So I'm just trying to set it up with the books because it's not working with the little. I ordered these really cheap like tripods off Tokopedia, and
Right.
Yeah, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, I get that. Good old Tokopedia. Yeah.
So so I was just kind of briefly introing you because I mean, the way that I do these conversations is I just bring people on when I get that feeling. I'm like, oh, I want to bring them on and I want to chat. And
Awesome.
It was maybe what, like a month ago or a month and a half ago, I think you posted about just like emerging from a Vipassana. And there was just something about, I mean, obviously I've been following you for a while. We've known each other for a couple of years and whatever. And I miss you. I miss you.
Miss you vibe too, Kayla. Yeah.
And I just wanted to bring you on because there was something about the way that you wrote that felt really just like next level for Kieran, you know? It was like a deeper layer.
Yeah.
Impossible because for people that have been following you, you're a very deep soul. You feel a lot and you're not shy about expressing that and giving others the permission basically to do that. And I really love that about you. And so I just wanted to bring you on and have a conversation. I haven't really prepared too much other than,
awesome.
You know, the one thing that stuck out to me when I was putting together your bio and stuff was a quote you said about having the right tools, that when you were talking about shifting from suffering to thriving, which is so relevant right now.
Yeah.
And I know in my yoga classes, my teacher was always like, suffering is a choice, you know, pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And it's easy to say when you're on the outside of the suffering, but when you're on the inside of the suffering and you're like, okay, so I know this is a choice, but fuck. And you'd said something about, you know, everybody can do it if you have the tools.
Yeah.
And I want you to, I guess I just want to start by elaborating that because, again, it's an easy kind of statement. Like if you're scrolling through and you're like, yeah, cool, if you have the tools. I found for me personally, the hardest part is actually using the tools. And I'm curious about your journey with that and what goes behind that thought is it's possible for everybody if you have the tools.
Yeah, great question. So this is such a big one. Let's just start with the fact that it is a possibility and as to why it's a possibility first, and then go into the nitty-gritty details. So essentially, anyone that listens to this clearly has a brain. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. And now, anyone that is listening and has the capability to jump on this sort of live will most likely not have a piece of their brain that's missing. Right now, if you've got a piece of your brain missing, it's a bit different. Like people that have had operations that have needed to get pieces of their brain removed. Okay, it's a different story. They're quite literally handicapped to be able to utilize those certain regions in the brain that are critical. I'm missing the coconut right now. I'm really missing the coconut. I do miss a fresh coconut. And it's some pieces are quite critical for certain experiences. For example, a friend of mine, she's got terminal cancer actually, and she had to have I'm not sure exactly which piece of the brain it was, but it was responsible for emotional regulation. And there's various areas that are. However, once you start to get into that piece, it handicaps that person's ability to feel emotions, which is just insane. So she's in this very monotonous experience of life. She feels just content. So she doesn't feel joyful. She doesn't feel sad. She doesn't feel anxious. She doesn't feel peaceful. Just content. And it's really interesting observing that from the outside in, because she's got no conception of it at the moment, even though she's just lived her whole life with emotion. So it's crazy, right? But that's an example of when you've got a piece of the brain missing. It's not actually possible to rekindle those neurons that aren't firing the way that we want them to. However, when we don't have that issue, which is probably anyone that listens to this, or at least 99% of the people, yes, it is possible. So when we go through traumatic experiences, okay, a clear example is PTSD, is a certain memory that's stored in the brain. Right? Now, PTSD doesn't necessarily have to be this capital T for trauma. It can be this really small thing that happened in your childhood. It could be a breakup. It could be the most subtle experience in your life. And even if that experience triggers some big emotional response within you, it can still be your trauma. And what happens is during this traumatic experience, the brain is in a hyperactive state of wanting to collect as much information into the system as possible, okay? Because it wants to recall that memory, that moment, as clearly as possible so that it can relate to that memory in the future to protect you. Because the brain is more focused on the idea of survival than it is on happiness. I mean, we're designed to live, right? And then it's our choice to actually pursue happiness or to cultivate happiness. I don't really like the word pursuit. And it's not really the brain's choice to actually want to give it to that to us, because ultimately survival is about isolation a lot of the time rather than actually expression. Happiness is more about expression, right? And when the brain constantly wants to close itself off because it wants to protect itself here and here and here and here, right? I'm putting up walls to protect myself, which tomorrow become my prison, right? So I'm really building my own prison. It's unfortunately what a lot of people are stuck in, is this cultivation of prison walls through these old memories that are coming into play and triggering. So to bring it home, essentially what's happening is with these emotional experiences from early on, people's childhood, generally it's the first 7 years of life. Of course, anything can happen even after that can cause emotional responses. It becomes this emotional memory that's created. With that emotional memory comes all those experiences that were there, such as the smells, the sights, the sounds, the things that were touching everything, which is why people that have unfortunately been in situations where they've been sexually abused, even raped, the smell even of sex will trigger them massively, or just a scent of something will trigger them massively. Why? Because of that association with that specific scent during that moment, right? So it's triggered. Even if they're not even conscious that smell was there, it's interesting that the brain will still pick it up. You don't even need to be conscious of it. Because what's going on here is a particular piece of the brain called the reticular activating system. It's super famous. A lot of people seem to know about the reticular activating system. And basically what it does is it constantly scans the environment and tries to pick up all this information for you to keep you safe. Okay, so it's like when you're in the woods and you're walking through the woods and you hear a little crackle on the from like a twig or something like that, and you're like, oh, a tiger, right? That's what the brain will think. Right? That's a reticular activating system scanning the environment to keep you safe. Right? That's what it does. So when it's scanning the environment, trying to pick up different pieces of information, it's no wonder that randomly we might just get triggered throughout our day when we don't know why we feel almost anxious all of a sudden, because probably the brain at some stage has picked up this information from a previous, that's associated to a previous memory that was strongly emotionally triggering, and then all of a sudden we're triggered and we don't know why, right? So that's where all these different triggers will just randomly come and go, and we're not sure as to why. But essentially what happens is when we actually can go deep into what we call unconscious memory in psychology, they'll call it unconscious memory. We can really go into where these sensations occur, which is that feeling of being triggered or that tension in the body when a trigger occurs or when suffering occurs, right? And when the suffering is occurring at that deeper level, a lot of people try to intellectually solve that suffering. So they'll think, oh, well, I'll go into nature, I'll go to this yoga session, right? And that's great. That's actually better than what most people do. Most people will actually go and spend money. They'll go and have sex. They'll go and drink alcohol. They'll go and take drugs, right? So that's what people usually do on a surface level. When people get a little deeper, they'll go into nature or go to yoga or go to that meditation class or something, which is again great. However, it's still not quite getting to the issue that's deep at the deeper level of the unconscious memory. What's actually occurring is they're calming their system So they're desensitizing themselves to that trigger, which is great. However, it doesn't solve the trigger. In order to actually solve the trigger, we've got to go into the experience and actually sit with the experience fully until we come to a place where we're fully at peace with that experience itself. Because it's not the memory itself that actually is a real issue. It's the triggered experience within ourselves that actually occurs, right? That's why they say trauma is stored in the body. Because it really is. It's this triggering experience within the body that occurs based on an old memory. And until we're in a place where I'm completely okay when that feeling arises in my body, I will continue to suffer. So, because we all have a brain, and because most people, 99% of people, I'm assuming at least, listening, has a complete brain and doesn't have a piece of their brain missing, that means that quite literally everyone listening has that capability to unwind, exactly what I shared, and that's what we call neuroplasticity. Right? Now, neuroplasticity just simply means neural connections that are changeable. Okay, that's quite literally what it means. All right, so essentially we're taking the state of the brain, we're making it very changeable, which means we're making it very plastic, which means basically it's in a state where it's more malleable, more capable of change. And we're putting in new patterns of peace, new patterns of calm, new patterns of contentment in a situation that previously would have created patterns of anxiety, patterns of fear, patterns of overwhelm, right? All these different experiences. So all that we're doing is over time, by continually sinking into the experience that the trigger brings up and coming to this place that we might call equanimous or neutral with the experience, we're constantly choosing peace, peace, peace over the overwhelm, over the anxiety. And over time, the brain eventually creates this new solidified pattern when next time that trigger comes up, I remain peaceful. And that's what I mean by when we've got the right tools, anyone can heal. Yeah, because everyone's got a brain. Everyone's got a brain that can be plastic. Therefore, everyone can change what's going on in the brain with work and with the right tools.
Yeah. I love the way that you describe that, and also the lengthy detail that you went into that from a scientific level, because I feel like the science behind what actually happens in our body is super important. For me, I'm more of the airy spiritual type
That's beautiful too.
which is great, you know, but
it is.
Like the other side, because I've read the science and, you know, I understand from being in my body, but to be able to explain that is really one of the reasons I brought you on here. So I love that. And I love the way that you kind of went into the possibility of shifting. One of the things I actually felt called to ask you about with regards to that, because you've been in Bali, I've been in Bali, there's also this level of like, I have a personal belief that if we stop trying to fix and change ourselves, then there is a lot of like happiness and self-acceptance in that, because that's my own personal experience. However, that feeling came from trying to fix and change myself, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of this thing where there's no right answer. But when you were talking about neuroplasticity and the ability to essentially reverse PTSD ourselves, you know, like over time, you're reconditioning yourself to feel a certain way, which is now the choice of peace, which takes a lot of time and, you know, energy, and but is totally possible. There's this element that I'm seeing in the world, especially with the increase in social media in the last 5 years and the increase in global trauma being spoken about. Not that I don't know if the trauma's actually changed. I mean, World War II, the whole world went through something, you know, and all that, but now we have access to everybody's brains and thoughts and feelings and emotions at like the drop of a hat. And there's this level of spiritual perfection that comes out of that I notice, where, and I went through it when I first discovered breath work, and I mean it for years and years and years, but specifically then on the healing path, where, oh, okay, I can dig up my trauma and heal it. Awesome. And then you just start digging and digging and digging and digging and digging, thinking that a clean slate really is possible. And I have a personal belief that I don't believe that a clean slate is possible, because one, you're constantly collecting more information that you're going to process throughout and later. And two, I believe that it's an unrealistic expectation to think that you're going to be whole, complete, and perfect, because that's not what it means to be human. this ever cycling thing, but what I see is people thinking that there's an end to their healing, and thinking that they're going to get somewhere, and thinking that once I do this, everything's going to be great. And it's the same mentality that people have used with greed and any kind of accomplishment in their life. And so I call it spiritual perfection, because it's this like thinking other people have it figured out. And like, I just want to know your stance on what I'm talking about and what's coming up.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up. Really glad you brought that up. Yeah. So we'll take it from a scientific perspective first, and then we'll take it from a spiritual, which will also come back to the scientific. So firstly, if we just looked at it plain on a scientific basis, 100% you're correct. 100%. Even on a spiritual basis, which we'll get to in a second, which I'll explain more in detail. On a scientific basis, if we really look at the brain, it's going to constantly pick up patterns. It's going to constantly create reactions to certain situations as we continue through life. Therefore, it's going to constantly create more emotionally stored memory. Right? Therefore, this emotionally stored memory that we constantly are collecting can be re-brought to the surface as we continually experience situations that are reflecting of those emotional experiences that happened in our past. Right? So, say my girlfriend at this point, my girlfriend, say she suddenly comes in and says, "Kieran, don't like you anymore. See you later." Right? It's going to be like, that's going to be really emotionally triggering for me. And now I might associate, say I got another partner sometime in the future, and that future partner suddenly comes in and storms into the room. I might quickly get really triggered because she stormed into the room, because I'm associating that to a previous experience where, my girlfriend has stormed into the room and broken up with me. Right? So I'm associating those certain specific experiences, even though it's a completely different situation. The experience association with that is that of the past, and therefore a trigger. So I can continually create these new experiences that I'll continue to recycle and recycle and recycle. So from a scientific standpoint, 100% not possible to be fully healed and fully non-reactive. Because we've got this, what we call limbic system in the brain. The limbic system is quite literally a big chunk of the brain that's designed to react. It's literally designed to react. So we can't just get rid of the limbic system, because I wouldn't be able to live. I actually need the limbic system to live. The limbic system is basically designed to react to situations to keep me alive. Right? It's a primitive aspect. It's what they call the crocodile brain. It's where the monkey brain derives from, is the limbic system. Right? Now, if we look at the scientific standpoint, right, spiritual standpoint, put it this way, mostly no, except for the very few exceptions of very specifically worked on souls. Right? So when I went to the Vipassana retreat in Buddhism, they obviously, I'm sure you're very well aware, have this strong belief of past lives. So as our souls go through various lives, they have various experiences through these lives. And what happens is, over these different lives that they go through, that they move through, these old souls, right, as they continue to work towards what we call liberation. Liberation is freedom from the mind. Buddha literally means above the mind. So Bud is mind, Da is above. So most people in this world, pretty much every single person, is a Buddha, below the mind, which means we react to the mind. So when we have a thought, it's our reality, right? So that's Buddha. And Buddha means no matter what thoughts come into my mind, no matter what emotions come into my body, I'm completely equanimous and at peace with it. That's Buddha. Now, there have been thousands and thousands of Buddhas in the world. It's just Gautama the Buddha himself was the one that was most famous, because he's the one that actually spread his teachings. The other Buddha in the past, or even after him, didn't create as much of an impact as he did, which is why he became so famous 2,500 years ago. And basically how he's explained, how Buddha's explained, is he felt into his deep meditation, felt into a deep meditation after he'd been enlightened. Enlightened is only an experience that certain souls can have. And he felt into why he was a person that could become enlightened. And first, of course, is the key to liberation. So anyone can become liberated per se, which means they're free from their mind and their emotions. But to be enlightened, which is the next phase, is a whole another level, which is this concept of his many of his previous lives. He had been constantly working towards liberation, until eventually he just got to this point where he opened this gateway they call enlightenment, where he could actually see so clearly. He could download all this information and all this different stuff, right? Of course, there's many people that can download information, right, that talk about in the spiritual world. However, it was just so clear to him that he was literally always in this middle point between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. So that's what enlightened is. And unless you're one of those souls that has had various past lives that have continued to seek enlightenment, continue to succeed in liberation, and eventually you've been able to open that doorway to enlightenment, which is why there'll be people like Sadhguru, Sri Ravi Shankar, who are these beautiful spiritual beings in the Eastern world who are able to just speak so clearly and concisely, and always seem to be in this beautiful energetic presence that people are just so worshipping of, even though they're not seeking worship, right? They're not seeking worship at all, yet people still worship them simply because of their presence. So that's what they say is enlightened. So to answer your question in a very roundabout way, scientifically, no. Spiritually, yes, but very minimally. For the average person, it should be a intention, not an attachment.
Yeah.
So intention, not an attachment. What I mean by that is, yes, there's a great set concept of, okay, liberation or freedom from the mind and body, or freedom from the mind and emotion. But it's understanding that it's an ongoing journey. If I become attached to the idea of liberation, I'm literally backtracking myself from liberation. Because the idea of liberation is freedom, right? The moment I become attached to a goal, I'm actually taking a back step from freedom. So now I'm not again imprisoned within a concept, because now I can't actually take forward steps within my liberation within myself. So the idea of liberation is non-attachment, and the idea of non-attachment is to not be attached to a specific goal, but to simply set an intention. And that way I can start to work towards this, and that's where I'm going to make the most progress within that sense of liberation. So when people say, I never suffer, that is complete baloney, okay? Because if they're saying that, that's probably the ego speaking. Honestly, even just the subtlest show of a reaction in them in any shape or form, okay, is going to be a sign that yes, they do suffer. Because suffering doesn't have to be this immense thing where they cry for days on end. Suffering is literally the moment I'm rejecting or reacting within myself. That's suffering. So when they say pain is always going to be an occurrence within life, but suffering is a choice, that's what they mean by that. Suffering, yes, is a choice, because if I react within myself, no matter what happens, whether it's a thought or an emotion, just any sort of sensational experience within myself, and I react to it, I'm rejecting myself in that moment, therefore I suffer, right?
Yeah.
How long, how deeply, completely depends on the depth of my association with that trigger. So that's the answer to the question.
Went back to that whole difference between pain and suffering, because I contemplated on it a lot in my life, due to my addiction to pain, which I'm sure a lot of people have experienced either on a conscious or unconscious level. And the attachment to the pain is what causes the suffering. And kind of to elaborate on that for anybody that's listening, to give you an example of what does that even mean? How do you know if you're attached to the pain or something? I personally just wanted to offer, yesterday I actually went through a couple hours of this whole, it was super weird, but anyway, but it happens not regularly, but kind of regularly, to the point where I don't get surprised when it happens anymore. But I'm a highly sensitive, highly emotional person. And sometimes I just feel shit. And sometimes it's I don't know if it's mine. I don't know if it's collective. I don't know what it is. And, it doesn't really matter. It just, sometimes I feel shit. And yesterday I really sat with myself of really just, as it was going on, there was really just not much happening up here. It was really a visceral experience. And it tapped me into the allowance of just allowing it to pour through, and the concept of the body being a channel. I really, especially recently, I've kind of been kind of into death lately. My cat died a few weeks ago, and it got me pretty existential. Yeah. Thanks. But death gets brought into my life quite a bit through different animals and conversations and people that I work with that are ill and things like that. And it's a beautiful contemplation because you really start to look at the body as like a body. And so when we're experiencing this pain, I really like to think of the body as like a channel, you know, like electricity channels through, goes down to the ground, channels through, goes down to the ground. And going back to the suffering, to give the example of how do you know if you're suffering or just feeling pain, I think it's beautiful what you said, just that attachment to it of needing to change it, needing to shift it, not trusting it, like just not allowing it in any way. So I just wanted to add that little tidbit in there for anybody that's like, yeah, what's the difference, you know?
I love that.
Yeah.
Essentially, if I need anything else than what I've got right now or what I'm experiencing right now, that is suffering. So it's either craving or aversion. So yeah, and what I really loved how they explained it within the Buddhist culture, which was the idea is any craving or aversion of anything I'm experiencing in this moment is going to cultivate suffering. It's always going to lead to suffering. Now, craving and aversion on its own isn't suffering. However, it's the craving and aversion that creates the attachment to another experience than what I'm experiencing right now. I'm loving all the hearts that are coming through. And with that attachment, that's what the suffering is me needing something else than what I have right now, what I'm experiencing right now. Yeah. I think, that what you shared with you being able to come to that place of where you're just like a channel and you're just letting things flow, that's so beautiful. So like, beautiful. It takes so much work to create a space like that. What's that, sorry?
I said yesterday, we'll see how it goes. No, it's not like but it was really, I was like sitting there and I was like literally feeling a lot. And like to have it kind of like pour out of like your eyes and just like to feel that, because I do a lot of sessions with people. So I feel like some of it just kind of gets stuck or whatever. And, but that being able to feel and just not worry about being stuck there, you know, it's just going to come through and allowing life to like pour through you. And I made a post last night too about like the full moon, again, to get super woo woo, is like, this is a time where like
I wouldn't call it woo woo, don't I?
The vibration kind of like picks up and the energy gets higher, and it's kind of like, just let it pour through you. Like, don't stop it. Just let it come through and like, you know, be able to like channel that energy. And, you know, I know for you, you work with energy in a big way in your meditation practice, which gets me to, I want to ask you about your Vipassana. And so for those that are listening and don't know what the hell I'm talking about, Vipassana is a 10-day meditation. That's pretty much all you do. I've never done one. I'm still a bit resistant to it. Still don't have the time, still don't have the space, whatever.
I know the feeling.
But I feel like 2021's maybe my year, but we'll see how it goes. But I know a lot of people who have done them, and it's beautiful to see the peace when somebody comes out of it, not saying that they didn't experience chaos within it, because usually that's what I hear goes down. And before you talk about your actual experience with Vipassana, I'm really curious what led you there. So
great question.
Your first one, right?
Yeah. So this is my first one, and I definitely plan now, after I felt into it, after my experience, I would like to do one yearly, but when I ended the experience, I'll explain why when I get there. Didn't want to do another one. I'm like, I'm never doing that again. Oh man. Anyway, what led me to it is when I was really deeply, I was going through another depression episode about 2.5 years ago, so end of 2018. So a little less than 2.5 years ago. This is when anxiety that I was experiencing at the time hit its peak, and I suffered depression and anxiety for quite a bit of my life. Depression more so first. It was a primary experience that came through, and that came through starting in middle school and started to grow and grow and grow, and eventually anxiety entered my life. And as anxiety entered my life, I started having these random, what I know now were panic attacks. Had no idea at the time, didn't know what was going on, just thought I was freaking out. And eventually it just built up to a point where, man, I suffered. I really, really suffered. And it's one of the main reasons why I'm so passionate about anxiety now, is because of that, on top of a few other reasons. And in December of 2018, I was following all these beautiful pages on Instagram that had really helped a lot. One was the holistic psychologist. I actually had the opportunity to get a session with her, Dr. Nicola Pera, and did some work with her. And then I also had the opportunity of starting to follow this amazing page called Young Pueblo, who's a beautiful writer on, he's a Vipassana writer. So he does a lot of Vipassanas himself. I didn't know this at the time. And he meditated a lot, meditated 2 hours a day outside of the Vipassana, and would come up with all this beautiful writing, beautiful insights. And so as he started posting all these snippets, I became very intrigued, and I found that they really helped me to develop this sort of insight. By reading what he wrote, I'd be able to reflect within and create connections and create new learnings and actually grow from his writing. It was mind-blowing. Like, man, if he's gained these insights and gained this awareness, maybe I can too. And then on some of his posts, he'd talk about Vipassana, and that really intrigued me. So I looked it up, and from there, I became really intrigued about it. I started seeing a couple of times as well as Young Pueblo. That's his writer name anyway. And he'd sometimes just said on Instagram, "Hey guys, I'm going away for 10 days of silence." And then another time he's like, "Hey guys, I'm going away for 30 days of silence." I'm like, 30 days? That's insane. Yeah, like all these, I was just super inspired by that. And so I started researching into Vipassana, and saw that there were literally hundreds of Vipassana centers throughout the world. I can't remember how many there are now. And as I was noticing this, I was noticing there was one close to where I was living at the time, which was Quebec City in Canada. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. It's about an hour drive away. So I started looking into that, but then same as what you just said, don't have time. And then eventually when I made it to Bali, I found there was one in Jakarta. I'm like, and then again, don't have time, always busy. Even though Bali's like seemingly calm place, just as well as I do. The energy that moves there. Yeah. And it was when I finally came back to New Zealand, and I went through a little bit of friction in a previous relationship about 6 months ago. That triggered that memory again of me wanting to look into Vipassana again. So I looked into it, and I saw a few different opportunities in terms of opportunities to go into the Vipassana here. It's only 45 minutes north from where I live, which is great. There's only one in New Zealand, and it just so happened that this was my third time actually trying to apply for it, because I tried 2 more times earlier that year and I'd failed, because basically if you don't get one within like the smallest time slot, because it's so popular, you can't get in. I was lucky. I knew the day that the applications would come out, put it into my calendar, and I sent in my application. It's like an hour to fill out his application, and then you got to fill out another one because they send another one over, and another one as well. And it's just this crazy process. And then finally, when I got accepted, they gave me a good call, and they're like, "Hey, we saw that you'd suffered depression, anxiety before. Just wanting to let you know this, and this." I'm like, "Yeah, that's all good. I'm all good with it." And they're like, "Yeah, sweet. Well, we'll like personally give you a nice tour, and like we'll welcome you when you get here." And they really took care of me due to my previous mental health issues. And it was just such a beautiful process. And of course, for those that don't know, it's completely free. It's donation based. So the idea of Vipassana it's literally a process invented by Buddha himself, Gautama Buddha, 2,500 years ago, and he ran Vipassana sessions. That's how he spread his teachings, was he taught people Vipassana. And Young Pueblo, except the young, because the person that wrote it is, I believe he writes it Y-U-N-G, in Pueblo.
I post this too for anybody, and also the holistic psychology and some Vipassana stuff. So I definitely found that stuff helpful as I was working through that. And and then eventually, of course, in February, end of January came around, and there I was in the Vipassana retreat. So that was how I got to it. And my experience, the hardest thing I've ever done. Like literally the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's interesting that the reason why it was so hard was because I chose it to be hard. And this is what I mean by it. It's quite easy to be in a meditation or meditative state and to avoid what you're meditating on. It's actually quite easy. It's not easy in terms of like, it's easy to completely avoid it, but easy in terms of it's easy to cushion it, or to
sidetrack from it. So naturally what can occur as a reaction thing that people will do within a meditation is to try to make it okay within themselves, rather than just diving into the sensation. Now, because I'd meditated quite a lot, I was aware of this, aware of that the mind will naturally try to create solutions. And when the mind creates solutions, then I feel better, but I'm not actually solving the unconscious trauma that's there. Right? I'm not actually resolving it within myself, because that actual trauma is still there. All I've done is I've solved the issue that came from the trauma. So the extra layer that came on top, I haven't actually solved the deeper root. Right?
Yeah.
So essentially, what I chose to do from literally day one was I'm like, okay, well, whatever comes up, I'm not going to try solve it. None of that stuff. I'm just going to go into it fully. I'm going to feel it fully. And I'm not even kidding you. About midday, day one, I wanted to leave.
Yeah.
Midday, day one. And here I was, someone that could meditate for 2 hours at a time, someone that had meditated for 7 or 8 years up until then, wanted to leave on the first day of Vipassana. But what I quickly came to understand was, when I got to the end of the Vipassana experience, these 10 days of silence, it was meditation. It was about 11 hours of meditation a day. And you're eating like 2 meals a day, with a little bit of fruit in the evening. If you're a return student, you only get 1 meal a day. It was, oh no, you can get 2 meals a day, you just don't get dinner, that's right. So it's like a big fast. And you're not allowed to look anyone in the eye, you're not allowed to, of course, speak to anyone. Just no association with no one, nothing. And I found out at the end when I got talking to people that they didn't have anything come up until about day 7, day 8, day 9 even. And when I started to really understand what was going on is that what I just said earlier, it's quite easy to actually, when you actually get into that deep meditative state, to still quite try to solve it. So basically there's a natural experience to really solve it. And then when you really get to the deeper layer, that's when things get really, really difficult and things come to the surface. And like that process really comes to the surface. And what I found is, because that came up on day one, I had the opportunity to spend basically the whole 8 to 9 days of that meditation experience just working through all the stuff. And then by the end of day 9, I was so light and so free. I felt like I'd worked through almost what felt like a lifetime of stuff. And I felt really light day 9, day 10. But like I said, it was definitely not easy. There was definitely many moments where I wanted to leave even from day one. Every day felt like 3 days. So by the end of the 10 days, I actually felt like I'd been gone over a month. It's like, it quite literally felt that way. Time was skewed. Every day just felt so long. Like I'd wake up in the morning at 4 o'clock in the morning by the bell, like, gong, every morning. And and then I'm like, okay, cool, let's go. I even had I had 9 probiotic tablets. So basically I had one for like 9 out of 10 at 10 of the days. And so I knew that I was like counting down by the amount of probiotics that I had. So I had all these like little games that felt like, honestly, you're in a prison. Like the cell, they literally call it a cell where you stay. So it's like your cell. I'm like, that sounds like I'm in a prison. And it's literally, you get 3 square meters of space. For Americans, that's about 9 square feet, 10 square feet of space. And then you've got your bed, and that's it. That's your room. It's this tiny little space. So you're not even allowed to do yoga or go for a jog or nothing. It's this tiny little like region. And it's basically designed to make you face as much of the stuff within you as you can. That's what it's designed to do. And as you continue to decide to work through that stuff, you continue on that path of what they call liberation, which is that freedom aspect. So that was really my experience. I mean, many things happened. I remember one meditation on day 7, I think it was. So I've done LSD before, and I'd only really done it once before. That's not really my thing. But essentially, I was surprised to find that I had an LSD experience with no LSD in my meditation. I had about 10 minutes where the eyes started going like this crazy, like rapid, like what is with my eyes closed, which I was just allowing it to happen for about 10 minutes. And then the whole like kaleidoscope of colors and like flying through the kaleidoscope of colors and just all the stuff. And like, wow, these chemicals are actually in your brain. Like that's valid proof for me. That's so cool. That's I don't know how to do it. It just happened, right? Because I was in just such a deep meditative state. But it's pretty cool that you can get so connected to that spiritual realm, that spiritual aspect of self. It's really beautiful. That's really possible. And for me, the experience was far more grounded when I was on LSD as well. Because when I was on LSD, I was like tripping, right? But when I was actually in a grounded meditation, I get what they mean when like those spiritual people, the enlightened people, they talk about how being on like a plant medicine is like looking through a keyhole. The person that's actually in the meditation experiences, they're actually in through the other side, actually in the other room, right? But when you're on like LSD or ashwagandha, bloody ayahuasca, I don't know how I confuse those two. It's like looking through a keyhole. You're still getting a full experience, but compared to the actual experience of what they say enlightenment is so it's pretty cool, to say the least. And I would recommend anyone, once they're in a place where they're able to sit for an hour on their own and close their eyes and actually fully meditate, I'd suggest having that as a bare minimum before they go there, because not only would that be very difficult to go through 11 hours of meditation a day, but they're probably not going to get the benefits that would be worthwhile to go for that 10, 11 days of meditation as well, because they're probably not quite at that level where they're going to get the deeper experiences. So that's
have like a recommendation too, because there's a big thing in, again, that once I do this, then I'll be happy, or I just need this and everything's going to be sorted. And I think, people do it with yoga retreats or coming to Bali or, all these things like, okay, I'm going to go there and myself, and it's like, I need to make this big grandiose gesture in order to get the desired result. And actually what you've just said is get yourself to a point of an hour and then do this. And it's like, just by getting yourself to a point of being able to meditate and sit for an hour, I mean, that's a journey in itself that's really gonna like shed away so many layers that like whatever you're looking to achieve from going to Vipassana, you've probably already worked through by the time you show up, and then you can go down to that deeper layer.
Yes, correct. Exactly on point. There's so much of a deeper layer that you get to when you're spending that much time. But even in an hour, you've already worked through a big chunk of it. When you get to that deeper layer, that's where you're doing you're creating a new environment of the mind. So what they mean by that is you're creating a situation where you're not creating new triggers. So you've started working through many triggers already, and you're evolving the mind into a situation where it's not creating a reactive mind, meaning I'm not now creating new triggers. So it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. But like I said, if you want to be able to be at that state, and you actually want to make the most out of Vipassana, 100% would recommend being able to, if you can, be able to meditate with your eyes closed in stillness for an hour. Because you get to a point, I think day 6, where they actually tell you to, or day 5, where they actually say, try not to move a single muscle the entire hour. And so every single hour, like I was like, you'd still like move slightly, but you're basically in a place of complete stillness. So even when you really want to move, they say that's a reaction, don't move. And you get really itchy, if you itch, that's a reaction, don't itch, right? So like everything is a reaction. So it's like just complete stillness and just allow everything to flow. It's it's the most beautiful yet chaotic experience.
Yeah, such a game too. Like when you have a fly on your face in Shavasana.
Literally, like I'd have one come under my nose. I'm like, no.
And you're like, and then that comes in. You're like, okay, I'm not going to move. And then you're like, well, what does this bring up about my desire to always win? And then you're like off in this like huge tangent. Like, honestly,
yeah.
What was your integration like? Like, the experience, but like, what was it like coming back?
Oh man, that was a whirlwind as well. So long story short, like I remember I got to the day, which is day 10, at some stage in the morning, I think you get to finally speak again. So you essentially start on day zero in the evening. So it's almost 10 full days, but not quite, where you're not speaking at all. And when I could finally speak, I was saying to everyone, I'm like, never doing this again. I was like, that was so hard. I feel so good, but oh man, like I suffered so much. And it was, even though it was so rejuvenating. But what essentially happened is about 2 days post Vipassana, it really came to me. I'm like, actually, you know what? this is something I really want to do at least once a year, or maybe once a year would be actually a good set idea, or set goal, I think, just because that's just such a cool way to just, you know, dedicate that time to really go deep. And my experience of integration from it was from that place of just super groundedness, complete, like, used to this intense silence the whole time. Basically, straight from the Vipassana on day 11, which is when you're allowed to leave. My parents and I, we went to brunch, so we went to a cafe, and it was such a busy cafe. It was it was a really busy cafe, so all I heard was like this like cluttering of like the coffee cups and like all the, you know, cafe noises and like all the food and all the chattering and everyone needing to yell over each other, and like I'm like there just super sensitive. It was pretty crazy actually having that experience, but at the same time I wasn't reacting so much to the situation, which was nice, even though I felt sensitive to the situation. So it felt like quite nice to be like, wow, this is a situation where the difference in intensity that I've changed from, that shift would normally have in the past triggered me, and to be able to feel that groundedness was very beautiful. And then from there, it was actually quite a beautiful integration. I didn't feel very motivated to do anything in particular. I just felt like I just wanted to be with life, which was quite beautiful. And that might put many people off, but quite honestly, it's the reason why I've got such strong drive now, is because of that piece. Because now when things arise, I'm able to work through them much quicker. When barriers come up, I'm able to move through them much more easily than ever before. And because of that, I can maintain a strong sense of drive and motivation compared to in the past. So genuinely, I'm in a place where burnout is something that I haven't yet experienced since Vipassana. I don't plan on it for sure. But there's been many moments where pre-Vipassana I did hit moments of burnout. And that would, over a collective period of time, mean that I'm actually working more slowly than if I'd taken that time to ground myself and then invested that time where I would have propelled forward more easily. So that's essentially what the integration's been like. It was like progressive over about 2 weeks, where maybe I became a little less grounded than what I was from the Vipassana, and started to really kickstart forward movement within business, within many areas of my life, and actually feel motivated and driven again. But yeah, essentially, first 3 days, let's say, after the Vipassana was just like space, groundedness, peace, presence, and no really forward thinking at all. So, but yeah, then after that, it came up, and I spoke to a couple of people after the Vipassana about like maybe a week or two after that had gone, and they found that they ended up feeling actually quite anxious. So their experience is a bit different to mine. They found that afterwards they couldn't keep with the practice, and they were definitely overwhelmed coming out of it, just because of that complete change in experience.
Yeah, cool. I like what you talk about, and like the timeline that you give for that integration period, because I like to remind people whenever they go into any sort of deep work, traumatic work, when you're kind of navigating beyond space and time to feel something, there is no expected time of integration. And like, for example, breath work, like careful getting on your scooter after, careful the next, like you're going to be sensitive, like, well, how long does it take? You don't know. You have to just sit and observe yourself. And I've heard people after a breathwork session that's just an hour, let's say, or 2 hours, it takes them anywhere from maybe a couple hours or an hour to a week or 2 weeks to integrate that, and so for you, just being like so naturally like, like 2 weeks definitely didn't do a whole lot, just was a human, and like, this is cool. And it took me a long time to put it in, because you were really gone for 10 days. Like 2 weeks to me after a 10-day experience is like really short, but at the same time, like the amount of presence that you would have, everything that you would have worked through in that 2 weeks to be full on into that integration too. There is no space and time when it comes to these experiences. So I love that that you had that. And then also the level of trust that comes through as you speak about allowing yourself to just let go completely into the process, and then trust that you're going to come out, and now you have this like higher level of motivation, and now it's like a little bit smoother sailing. And what you've been experienced since Vipassana. That's super inspiring, especially for me, because I find sometimes that motivation is definitely like lacking in the business sense of the doing and all that stuff. It can be kind of erratic sometimes. Other months are different. Like, so it's nice to hear that, that, yeah, you found like a little bit more smoothness. And I'm curious, because I know where my motivation falls off, and it's usually emotionally based. You know, I get, not so much like sideswiped by my emotions the way that I used to, but I definitely know that like sometimes I have to feel what I'm feeling, or
Yeah.
sense to perform, or I'm exhausted or whatever. And I'm curious to know what's really shifted within you to change from that state of, from, you know, more erratic motivation to a more smooth motivation now.
I love that. I love that. So it was interesting because actually yesterday I had an experience where I was working through something. Like an old trigger came up, so I got the opportunity to work through it, which is awesome. And I had two client calls booked yesterday, alongside some like 3 specific tasks that I knew would take up the rest of the time of the day. And all I did was, I'm like, this is more important. Move those 3 things to the next day. 2 client calls already booked. I'll do them and I'll be able to show up fully. Simply because now I'm in a state where I am very free. Not fully free, 100%. No, I'm not fully free. Okay, like I said, I'm triggered. Okay, I'm not fully free. However, I'm much freer than in the past from my emotion and my mind, where I can, in that moment, not disconnect from them, because that means I can't even show up for people if I'm disconnected. I can only show up connected. So actually what I've got to do is stay connected, not block it out, but instead just place it to the side for a moment. It's like, oh, it's there, and then continue. And then every time it comes up, oh, okay, it's just acknowledging and then continue, right? So that's what I do on my client calls. And I'd even be honest with them. I'll be like, hey, just letting you know, like, when they ask me how I am, I'm like, hey, I'm actually working through something right now, and this is what it is. And just being fully open with them as well, I find is very beautiful, because that makes them feel more connected and more resonating with the work that I do, simply because now they're seeing that, hey, I'm not, some superhuman that doesn't feel negative emotions or unpleasant emotions, or I don't get like unpleasant thoughts or anything like that. No, I do actually get these things 100%. I'm just more free from them than I was, right? And my experience with them isn't as deep as it used to be, to the point where I'm just overwhelmed, can't do anything. And it's not to the length that it used to be, which used to quite literally go for months if I was triggered. I remember periods of time where I'd go through 3 months of depression, not feel a single happy day, or many happy moments that I could even really remember, honestly, in those moments. And it's just crazy to see the tremendous shift there. But A, the reason why I'm saying that is because it's 100% possible. And B, is the reason why I'm saying that is because the difference in how I experience a trigger that previously was experienced in an overwhelming way, as I slowly shift the experience of either the time frame or the depth, I'm actually growing. Because growth isn't an on and off switch. Growth isn't that I all of a sudden don't feel that experience anymore. Growth is that I either feel it a little bit less, or I feel it for less time. That's what growth is. The consequence of growth is a switch, right? The consequence of continuing growth is a switch. What most people do, unfortunately, is they'll get to a point where, like, as you talked about motivation, right? Why am I still not motivated? What's going on? Like, why do I still fall into this pit hole, right? That's where people just become very stagnant and have this yo-yo effect, right? They grow a little bit and they just regress because they're like, oh, I'm beating myself up. Like, how dare I? Why am I doing this? Like, all these different processes go on in the mind. And that's what is quite literally the ceiling for most people, is the moment that they start to create some form of progression within themselves. They hit a wall, they hit a trigger, and they see they're still in the trigger. They then regress because they beat themselves up. Yeah. Now, the only way to surpass that or overcome that is to actually acknowledge the growth that they're creating, which is the fact that actually, you know what, today, that thing that would in the past make me angry for 8 hours, I am now only angry for 7 hours. That's pretty cool. I'm growing. Like, yeah, I'm making progress. Like, actually acknowledging that, celebrating it. All right, there's a few reasons, right? I could talk about the science behind the importance of celebration, or like for a whole podcast, basically. But basically, celebrating will enable them to trigger some dopamine, create an effect in the brain that actually wants to continue that growth process, and will help them to continue to acknowledge the growth and actually continue the growth and continue the work that they're doing within themselves. But when they're not firing that dopamine circuit, when they're actually progressing, and they think of it as not enough, then now they're in a place where they're self-sabotaging, they're actually going to regress, and that yo-yo effect will continue. So to answer your question in full, it's that what I notice now is I more so acknowledge the growth that I'm making. I'm more capable now of just taking things without disconnecting myself from things, just placing them to the side for moments every time they come up, acknowledging them. Okay, I'll deal with you in a moment. Thank you. Right.
Yeah.
I'm just acknowledging constantly. And then actually I do deal with them, right? I keep that promise to myself. I don't just all of a sudden go to the next thing when I finish what I'm doing. Actually, okay, no, I've got time for you. And that creates trust within myself, because now I know, my mind knows that, okay, he's going to deal with me. He will come back to me because I've created that trust, right? So it's that integrity to self that's been able to build that sustainability. And then finally, dealing with things as early as possible has been a big shift as well. Because over time, as I'm triggered, my fuse is shorter. Therefore, I'm constantly building more trigger as I'm in that triggered state. So the best thing to do, and the most progressive and efficient thing to do, is as soon as I can to come to that, sit with it, feel it, and become a lot more equanimous and neutral with the experience, to the point where I'm actually completely okay with me feeling exactly how I'm feeling, right? And then from there, then I'll start to continue my day or continue my week, or whenever I start to really process it. So for me, yesterday, the experience that came up for me, I remember a very clear experience that happened about 2 years ago now, or just over 2 years ago now. And I remember that particular trigger took me about maybe 3 weeks to work through. It took me about 8 hours to work through, right? It's like the difference in time is insane. But and also it was a greater experience as well. Like the thing that actually created it was a greater thing, yet my experience of it was far less than it was in the past. So acknowledging that it's not that, man, why am I triggered again? It's acknowledging, man, look how much I've grown. Yeah. So that's what I mean by it's that continual process of of creating those shifts, and then that for me creates a greater sustainability of motivation.
Yeah, I love that. It's so funny that you went through something yesterday too. I had a girlfriend I was talking to. I was like, "What's in the air?" I was like, my friend Justine. I was like, "Justine, I think that," I was like, "what I'm feeling is that there's something going on right now." But
it felt like that.
Like went through something relatively intense, and I'm super stoked for you that you also had the experience of being able to be with it and acknowledge it in the way that it needed to be felt. Obviously, it's coming up and it's asking for attention again. So. And I'm before we get off of here, because I'm going to wrap this up soon, but you've mentioned throughout the talk a lot of the time working through something, dealing with something. And for the people that want to know, or they're still trying to navigate what that actually means for themselves, can you actually go through a very specific description of like, how do you deal with something? What does that actually look like? Like specifically, what actions do you take, or can you describe the moment of what you're sensing, and like how do you deal with shit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I like that. I'll just use a personal experience. I'm very open with that. So last year, I was in a relationship, lovely human, won't use names, very lovely human. Honestly, one of the kindest people I know, quite honestly. She was very kind, very thoughtful. Yet I noticed that there was it was just an observation of mine, but there was a lot of abandonment issues that were there because of their father. It was very, very fair. Like anyone that had gone through that would definitely have that experience. And what happened is, as we came to a point where I started to realize this isn't the right relationship for me, and I could quite clearly see we weren't a good fit. And I know that she realized that eventually, but at the time she hadn't. And as I started to communicate that with her, that I felt that we needed to bring the relationship to an end, there was these triggers that happened within her that led to her quite literally like raising a voice at me, and verbalizing things that didn't feel too good sometimes. And I did choose in those moments to completely remain calm and just let her vent, knowing that, you know what, I'm a centered person, I'm a grounded person, I'm a conscious person. I can handle this. I don't need to let this trigger me. I took it on. I didn't realize at the time, but I was taking it on. And I really did. And it did get to a point that after a few days of this, that I actually just started crying. I'm like, wow, I did not think that would happen, but it just all came out. And I was realizing, frick, I took on a lot of that, a lot of heat. And I continued to, even after we split, after that relationship, I continued to take it on because I didn't want to react. I wanted to remain conscious in that space. But I continued to take it on as heat would come my way. And I know that wasn't her intention 100%, because she definitely shared that with me when we jumped on the call one time. But man, it just got too much for me, to the point where I just couldn't keep the communication going, because I wanted to try. I was the one that took myself away from her. She had no control over that. So I wanted to at least do it some justice, and at least help her feel as though I'm not just throwing her aside, because that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want her to feel like she was just tossed aside. That's how she felt. So me being this person that, wanted to, in a way, save her, or, not make her feel as much pain that she's feeling. Unfortunately, I chose a thing that actually ended up causing her more pain, which is elongating it, rather than just being like, actually, we just need to close this, which is probably what I should have done earlier. But hey, we live and we learn. And anyway, long story short, went through all this, like just taking on all this load of raised voices, or being very critical about certain things, that when I was just trying to be compassionate. And it did get to me. It did get to me. And it actually is what tipped me over the edge to what led to this chronic fatigue experience that I'm still recovering from. I'm about almost 5 months in, or just over 5 months in, my chronic fatigue. I'm quite tired now, honestly. Like, my brain's not even operating. It's probably operating about 60-70%. So sometimes I'll be telling a story, and then my brain will go like this, and I'll just need to gently bring it back. But so I'm still working through that. But that was the trigger. That wasn't the reason. The reason was because I was just overdoing physical exercise. I was training for a marathon, training for powerlifting, just doing this different stuff. And I was spending so many hours in my business, not getting much sleep. And then on top of that, there was this. So that's what took me over the edge. And anyway, so had this real low energy. I couldn't literally get off the couch for a week. Couldn't even go grocery shopping, because I had no energy to even really move for about a week. And going through this experience was really triggering for me, because not only was I triggered by the experience, also triggered by the fact that I identified myself as this energetic, thriving human who had like this ability to just have all this energy, do all this physical activity, be super creative at the same time. And I was abundant with the energy, and then all of a sudden I had none. It was just a crazy shift to go into that. And even now, sometimes there's still a little bit of resistance, because I know that I'm only still about 70 or 80% of compared to where I was in terms of energy. And so it was that resistance to that. Now, this is what I've done to work through it, to the point where I feel very at peace with, first of all, that experience, and second of all, with the lack of energy. And it's just simply first coming to that point where I can change my state to see it more clearly. That's the first step. How to change your state. What is changing your state, right? So state is essentially the way I am within an experience. That's a state. Okay. So for example, if I'm triggered because I've taken on this load and I've started crying, my state is that of a lot of sadness, of a lot of release, of a lot of overwhelm, right? That's my state. Now, changing my state means that I can start to process the information that I'm processing at that moment in a different way, because I process information based on the state I am in. Okay, if I'm in a very sad state, I process it through a sad state. If I'm in a very abundant state, I'm sure many people can relate to this. They've probably had days that have been absolutely amazing, and something has happened, and like, yes, it's hurt, yes, it sucked, maybe it's even flipped to a bad day, but the experience of it is far different compared to if they're already in a very shit space, already in a very reactive space, and then something really big happens. It's like, why me? What? It's the end of the world. It's completely different, and the way I will handle that will be completely shut down. But if I'm in a very abundant state where something big happens, I at least will be a little bit more collected with how I handle it. My state will dictate how I process thoughts and how I move through things. Okay. So now the first step is to shift state. So how I do that is different things like certain types of breath work, right? You don't have to do anything really extreme. You could just simply use something like this double inhale and longer exhale that a neuroscientist called Dr. Andrew Huberman brought to the surface, which is just like this. And what he found is, based on studying different forms and modalities of breath work, Found that that was the simplest and quickest form of breathing exercise that could stabilize the nervous system and bring it to neutral. Because what it does is when you do a double inhale, it opens up sacs in the lungs that creates this dumping of carbon dioxide from the bloodstream into these sacs within the lungs. And then when you exhale, you're exhaling more carbon dioxide than you normally would. So basically, you're balancing out oxygen to carbon dioxide more easily. And he says about 3 to 6 rounds is enough. And you actually do this when you're crying.
Yeah.
Okay, you do it when you yawn. Right, so we actually already do this. It's just all these just started to realize is, oh, these are happening already. We're just going to tap into them before the situation happens, right? Before there's a demand for more oxygen, and that helps calm the system quickly. So you can change your state with that, with Wim Hof breathing, going into nature, whatever. Change your state, number 1. Number 2, sit with it, and that's it. That is quite literally it. And when I say sit with it, yes, that is probably the hardest thing anyone could possibly do. And why would you want to sit with an emotion? Why? Because every time you avoid the emotion, you're choosing reaction. Every time you choose reaction, you're literally solidifying that reactive response to that experience more so until it just gets to a point where, your fuse is so short that you can't even handle going outside or being around people. Right? Because essentially what's happening is your fuse just shortens and shortens and shortens. The more things that you push aside, all you're doing is you're throwing things under your bed. Until eventually there's no more room to put anything under the bed. You're shoving it in and there's no more room. And then all of a sudden, like, things just start popping out of like what's under the bed, or you can't even lie on your bed anymore, right? So that's essentially what people are doing is they're just shoving things into that space, or even into a cupboard until the cupboard just bursts open, right? And that's all people are doing. A great metaphor is, pushing a beach ball underneath the water. Just and then, shit. Exactly. So that's essentially what people do when they avoid it, is they're just storing it. As I mentioned with my trigger, I all of a sudden just burst out crying with my ex-partner. Why? Because I just took all this stuff on without actually doing anything with it, because I thought I could take it. And so sitting with it means I'm choosing now to work through it rather than to avoid it. So I'm choosing a different pattern. When I choose to sit with it, what's happening is quite literally just 2 simple things. 1, I'm in a place where I'm choosing a new process around a previous experience that I reacted to. And 2, when I sit with an experience, rather than running away from it, I'm not fighting, freezing, or flighting. Yeah. Fighting, freezing, and flighting is a reactive experience that takes our sympathetic nervous system that's our sympathetic response. Okay, sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight system. And this is triggered because of what's called in the brain the hypothalamus. Okay, the hypothalamus is then triggered by what we call the amygdala. So the amygdala is this tiny little, literally almond-shaped piece of the brain. It's quite literally looks like an almond down sort of near the brainstem back here. And this gets really triggered during any reactive response, any experience that comes up where I feel sad, feel anxious, feel overwhelmed. Okay, that's the amygdala is working. So the amygdala first activates, stimulates the hypothalamus stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, and that's when I'm in this freaky state of wanting to run away, wanting to fight something, or just freezing and not knowing what to do. Yeah. Sitting with it is doing none of those 3 things. Sitting with it is what we call is the 4th state, which is leaning in. Leaning in is not fighting it. Leaning in is sitting with it and not reacting. When I come to that place where I can sit with it, feel it fully, which means that I'm not tensing myself up, I'm able to relax, breathe into it and feel it fully, no matter what the emotion or experience is. And yes, this takes work. This isn't something that's just going to happen. Okay. Most people just feel like have a blank mind. Many of my clients I'll guide them through about 3 or 4 months of work first before we even go to that stage, because most of the time they can't even really process an experience fully without needing to put up these walls or block it or not being able to focus on it. All these different experiences will come up that prevent them from doing that, which is completely understandable because we're not designed to want to do that. We're designed to survive, not thrive. Right? So we're working on thriving. Thriving is a conscious decision, not a subconscious approach. Subconsciously, we're never going to create that until we step into conscious approach. So just to conclude, that little spiel is to simply come to that place where I sit with it. When I can sit with it and process it, the amygdala quietens. When the amygdala quietens, there's no stimulation of the hypothalamus, well, much less. And therefore, my fight or flight system, my sympathetic system, no longer stimulates the way it did. So therefore, there's no fight or flight response. that's needed, because I'm no longer in a reactive and fearful state. So that's what I mean by sitting with it to the point where the amygdala no longer needs to fire up and go, hey, Kieran, guess what? React. Okay, run away, fight, freeze, right? There's no longer that need because I've processed it. So that's what I mean by that. So change your state, sit down and process it. That is it. It's quite literally that. And that doesn't mean that when I sit down to process it, that's going to get completely processed and it will never come up again. It just means that I've processed that specific experience. Therefore, I've processed a specific reaction to one piece of this deeper layer of the mind, right? Yeah. So there's always going to be much more that's there, but it's just like a timely thing of constantly executing on these things. So.
And I love what you're saying about, because I'm asking you how to like do processing, and it's actually in the non-doing. Like you're not getting Google, you're not trying to figure it out, you're not trying to like force energy through you. You literally, very literally are sitting somewhere, not distracting yourself by food, Netflix, all of the other things that we can distract ourselves with, and you're literally just sitting with it and not distracting yourself even by too much breathing or like anything. You're just like, okay, I'm just gonna feel it. And again, like that channel, like just allowing it to flow through is, so if anybody wants to know how to like do processing, it's like really like a being state and a non-doing, and pressing the pause button, you know, but in a way of like just stilling everything so that with, because the way the body works is like the moment you let go, it starts to flow through, you know, and so getting yourself to the point where your muscles aren't tense from the nervous system and it can just flow through. I love the way that you described sitting with it. You're like, well, how do you do that? You literally sit with it. Literally sit with it.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Processing is a non-doing experience.
Yeah.
The more non-doing I am with the experience, the more free I am.
Yeah.
What I love about Sadhguru's explanation of his enlightenment experience at 25 years old is he said he was sitting on this rock of Mount something rather, I can't remember, somewhere in India. And he said all of a sudden he was just crying for the first time in his time as a grown man. He was crying for the first time. And he just didn't know what was happening. And when he opened his eyes, it'd been 11 hours or something. And he was like it was just, it blew his mind. And he said in that experience, after that experience, he realized, if I just do nothing, if I just mess with nothing, I am completely ecstatic. Like, there was tears of joy, tears of ecstasy. He said every cell in his body was just ecstatic. And his explanation of that was when he finally came to a place of complete non-doing, was he free? Yeah. So beautiful. So beautiful. And also when it comes to this non-doing, surrender is definitely a beautiful word that people use. It is, yes, definitely surrender, but it's not surrendering to it, it's surrendering it. The difference, right? So surrendering to it is like the house is burning down. I'm like, okay, I surrender, take me. And many people can get overwhelmed by that. Like, I don't want the sadness to take me. You're not letting it take you. All you're doing is you're letting it flow through you. So you surrender it, not to it. You're not surrendering to the sadness. You're surrendering the sadness. Big difference. When I surrender the sadness, it's when the fire is burning the house down. It's like, okay, the fire's burning the house down. I'll just go outside. I'll let it happen. It's done. I can't do anything about it. I can call the fire brigade. I can wait till they get here, but there's nothing more I can do. That's surrendering it. So if sadness comes, okay, there's nothing more I can do. I can just let it flow. I can let it process. I don't need to fight it. Okay. Or I also don't need to surrender to it, meaning it's just going to overwhelm me. Right? No, just let it flow. Surrendering it.
I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I think that's a pretty good wrap up. You definitely have like, if somebody could just like chronicle like all of your brain, you know, there's so much, like you can tell you've just done so much work over the years and so much, honestly, so much processing, so much being with things. There's a level of just understanding that comes from with you that's really beautiful. And so for anybody, just to like give you a couple little tags. So if you're not following Kieran, please do so. He just started a new page, which I love, because the humility of going from 24,000 followers to like 100 and something. I mean, that's for another time about why you did that. But you did notice that it was not as, you said it was because people weren't engaging as much or something like that.
So yeah, just to be completely authentic, I built my page when I was in the fitness industry, and long story short, when I shifted to the mental health space just over 2 years ago now, from then engagement started to decline because I had almost 30,000 people at the time of fitness people, and I'd completely switched industries, spaces, and even then I wasn't actually getting much engagement. Honestly, I was getting between 500 and 1,000, which actually isn't that much for the amount of followers I had. Like I never bought any followers, but in the early stages of building my Instagram, I did follow heaps of people and then unfollow heaps of people. Like I did that whole process. This was like 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, even or 6 years ago, ages ago. This is when like you could do that and it worked. And now like people are like, frick off. I'm not going to follow you. I can see what you're doing, right? Everyone knows it. And also Instagram has I think a blockage or something to it. But anyway, long story short, these weren't quality followers. A lot of the ones at the early stages. So anyone that I got from there, what would happen is because my engagement was already quite low for the amount of following, Instagram would punish that. Meaning when I posted something, it wouldn't put it on heaps of people's pages. The only time when that would happen is when if I got lots of comments at this very start, right? That it would like maybe reach quite a few of them, which would be fantastic. Then it would do well. And then I'd just get heaps of messages from all these different people being like, hey, bro, like I love your content. I've been following heaps, but you just don't come up on my page. I got that from so many people. And I was recognizing, wow, okay, I see. There must be an issue with the whole algorithm thing that's going on. I honestly got to a point over the last 2 years where I was honestly posting stories and I was getting as little as like 100 and something views, which is nothing for the followers that I had. And my followers had declined to like 24,000. And I was still getting lots of people coming in, but it was the people that were leaving. That were more than the people coming in, because obviously I'd shifted industries, shifted content, and they weren't there for that. So therefore what happened was, it just got to a point where because I was regressing seemingly on the surface more than I was progressing, Instagram punished that and didn't allow me to reach many people. So I just made a new account, and within the first 24 hours I was getting more than 100 views on my stories. I'm like, well, I might as well just do this. So that's what I've been doing, and I'll just go out from there. And it's connected to my good old TikTok. So TikTok always sends people my way, which is awesome. So I'm excited to see what happens in the new page.
Cool. So for anybody who's listening, you can definitely give Kieran a follow on his new page, Keza the Coach. I'm going to put it in the comments when I post this, and then I'm also going to post this discussion on YouTube. So if anybody wants to share it on Facebook, do you have a Facebook page they can find you on and tag you?
I do. I've got a page. I think it's called Coach Kez on Facebook as well. But my main thing on Facebook is actually, it's called the Thrive organization. So anyone, especially if you're in New Zealand, it's a completely free non-profit. It's a non-profit, means it's free. That essentially is a space like circles. Okay, so sharing circles, but it's a big community where you can just participate. And hey, Vander, right? I love that guy. He's one of my good mates. And basically, you can just be in that space. It's a beautiful space to be. It's like this ongoing. Oh my gosh, thanks, mate. You can just be in that space where. I'm not even gonna look at the comments anymore. You can just be in that space where you're just you're just in a safe space where you can be heard and seen with no judgment. And then you also will get the opportunity as well to participate in these sharing circles. We're going to start running Zoom sharing circles, and we do also in-person sharing circles here in Auckland, and that will continue on as well when I eventually move to Bali, which is going to be later this year. So that's a Thrive organization that you can join.
Cool. And then the other thing we haven't talked about is you have this awesome podcast with like a gazillion episodes called Pocket. And
Pocket Coach.
So if anybody loves nerding out on brain stuff and emotions and thriving and all of the things we've talked about on this call and 1,000 other things that I'm sure you have that you've been sharing, then it's on Apple, Pocket Coach. And then do you have any other platforms it's on, or?
Every platform. So it's on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, anything you can name pretty much. Yeah.
Everywhere. So they can probably just go to the link in your bio and find all the things. So just wanted to say thank you to everybody for listening in, and for contributing. Evander, you're not going to get married, I'm pretty sure. Giving you a shout out. Oh. Probably not the first one to ask him. He's pretty human. And
I appreciate that.
yeah, I just wanted to thank you for coming on and just for sharing everything in the way that you share, in the authentic way that you share. And if anybody wants to dive deeper, they can send you a personal message. I know you do some really transformational work with people on a long-term scale. And yeah, it would be pretty special to have that experience, to be held by you during that time. So if anybody feels the call and doesn't really know what this feeling is, just to reach out to you personally in the DMs and explore that feeling.
I appreciate that a lot. Thank you so much, Kayla. Honestly, I'm loving what you're doing, loving the work that you're doing, and yeah, it's so needed. So yeah, continue that path. It's an amazing path. And Evander, I'll definitely pocket you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's stay in touch, and I can't wait to see you in Bali. That makes me excited.
Yeah.
So cool.
Awesome.
Cool.
Right. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye.